What's going on, guys? Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be playing around with the Civic a little bit more. So if you guys have stayed up to date with the channel, you guys know that the Civic, maintenance-wise, is up to date. All new fluids are in. The car is ready to go. It's ready to be beaten on. Now, it is in pretty close to stock form. In the last video, I showed you guys how to install a Honda Flash Pro and how to reflash your ECU. In today's video, we're going to be taking advantage of that software by upgrading some other hardware parts on the car so that we can get more power. So in today's video, we're going to be playing around with the exhaust system. But before I actually get started with working on the Civic, I have two different tools here, let's call them tools, to show you guys the before and after. So I have a water bottle and I have a decibel meter. We're going to get in the car and I'm going to show you some things. Okay, so using the Honda app, I can tell that the car is warmed up and I'm going to show you two things. So first off, I want to show you how loud it is inside the car at idle and also at highway speeds. So right now I have my decibel meter turned on. AC is turned off. I'm just going to be quiet for a second and I'm going to show you guys these numbers. So you can see that it's hovering around the low 50-ish area decibels. Now when I turn the AC on, it should in theory go up a little bit because I have the fans blowing air. But what the main thing that I want to see with the AC turned on is how the water bottle shakes when I put it on my dash. So let's first take a look at the audio. So you can see it's pretty much 10 decibels louder. But what's cool is that the water that I have inside my bottle is vibrating a little bit. And with one of the mods that I'm going to be installing today, that might change. So with the AC turned on, it doesn't need to be on the highest fan speed, but with the AC compressor kicked in, you can see that the water is just slightly vibrating. So this here is with a stock motor mount, stock exhaust system. However, it does have a muffler delete. So it has stock cat, stock downpipe, stock pretty much everything else. It's just that the muffler is cut. While driving the car at highway speeds, you can see it's obviously louder. This is a combination of greater engine speed, wind noise, tire noise, gear whine, vibrations traveling through the chassis, and so much more. Now, it doesn't really mean much, but this is a baseline for now. Also, with the car warmed up and idling, you can see about from a foot away from the exhaust, it's reading about 76 decibels. Now, we'll see how much this differs after our upgrades. One last video before we start modding. Here's a sound clip from outside the car, giving a couple revs and bouncing the car off the rev limiter. Alright, so I've got the car now back home in the garage. I've let it cool down a little bit. Let me show you the mods that we're going to be putting on the car today. So from the title of the video, you can probably tell that we're going to be doing some exhaust upgrades, as I mentioned also earlier. Now, the reason why we're going to be doing, let's say, post-engine upgrades before we do pre-engine upgrades is we want the engine to breathe a lot better as is. So before we give the engine more air by replacing the intake and let's say the manifold, we first want to make sure that the engine can make do with the air that it's getting. So these Hondas and a bunch of other Hondas for that matter are very exhaust restrictive. So in this video, we're going to be replacing the downpipe, the full exhaust system, and some other parts so that we can get this engine to breathe and make more power. So there's many different ways to get this done. I'm showing you guys one of the more cheaper ways to go full bolt-on while still making very good power. So I am going to be running a full 3-inch downpipe and catback exhaust system for my Civic. In addition to the downpipe from KTuned and the exhaust system from Yonaka, I'm also going to be swapping out the exhaust hangers for these upgraded ones from Torque Solutions. So these are made out of polyurethane, and these are going to make it so that the exhaust system doesn't want to move around and actually rattle against the car under load. Also, on top of that, when you guys do swap out your downpipe for an aftermarket one, especially considering this is a larger diameter, it's a tight space in there, and you don't want to break the downpipe or even hit anything. So what I'm going to be doing is swapping out the lower torque mount with an upgraded one here from Hasport. This here is a 70 durometer polyurethane, so it's going to be a little bit stiffer, and that's why I showed you guys how the interior of the car is with the water bottle. It's going to show you the NVH, the noise, vibration, harshness inside the cabin. So if it does change, we're going to notice a difference with that water bottle. So all these exhaust parts that you guys see here that are found after the engine are going to be getting installed today. The parts that I have right here that are for the intake side of the car are not getting installed today, but you will definitely see them in the next video. Let's get started with swapping over some of this stuff. So this Civic doesn't appear to have a large engine bay. It looks as if the engine and transmission are shoehorned in there. Doing simple maintenance like replacing spark plugs is easy once you know how to remove the entire cowl. Let's quickly go over the process because we need to remove it to get access to the back side of the cylinder head. So first things first, Mark the position of the wipers on the windshield with a small piece of masking tape. Then, found on both the driver and passenger side, you'll find a rubber cap covering the wiper nut and a plastic cowl trim piece that needs to be lifted. Then, remove the 17mm nut securing the wiper arm onto the motor, and then wiggle on the arm and pull it up to remove it. Replicate the same thing for the passenger side. So the rubber cover, plastic trim piece, 17mm nut, and then the arm. It should look something like this when you're done. Now continue with removing the rubber strut covers that are found on the plastic cowl. The outer cowl trim piece by the fenders come up in the same way as the plastic piece above it. Pull upwards and then slide it over top of the wiper motor stud. Pay attention when you're removing all this stuff so you know how to reassemble it later. By the passenger side fender, you'll see a large plastic clip that's securing a plastic trim piece in the engine bay. Now it will have a rubber line attached to it, and that's going to be for the windshield washer sprayers. Unclip the line from the plastic trim piece and then twist off the rubber hose from the plastic connector. If you use your wipers recently, a bit of fluid may come out of the lines. Now to remove the main section of the plastic cowl, there's going to be 5 small plastic clips securing it. One of them was the same clip shared with the plastic trim piece for the rubber line. You'll find another in the center of the cowl, another on the driver's side, and then 2 smaller ones also found above by the window. You can use a panel popper or just give the panel a little tug and they should break free. Then pull forward on the cowl to unhook it from the lower metal brace and remove it from the car. You can see the small plastic hooks on the cowl that secure it in place. The last piece of the cowl assembly to remove is the lower metal brace. Now it's mounted in between both strut tower braces and it has additional support on the false firewall. Using a 12mm socket, remove each of the 3 bolts fastening the brace to the strut towers. Repeat the same thing to the other side. You'll then need to use a 10mm socket to remove the last 3 bolts. They're all going to be found in between the brace and the lower windshield surround. With all 3 of the bolts removed, you can pull forward on the brace and remove it from the car. It's crazy, but you can see how much more room there is. You could barely get on top of the valve cover, and now we have plenty of room to get access to the oxygen sensor and the downpipe. So on the back side of the engine, we can locate the downpipe and primary oxygen sensor. To remove it, unclip it from the bracket that it's attached to on the block and slide it backwards. Then separate the connector for the O2 sensor and the main wiring harness. Following that, using a 7/8 spark plug and a 3/8 ratchet, slide it over the O2 sensor and crack it loose. You can then fully remove the sensor from the downpipe. There's then going to be 3 12mm hex bolts that are securing the upper heat shield to the downpipe. Now one of them is going to be found on the bend section of the downpipe, and then the other 2 are going to be found by the mounting flange. Now here's another angle of the heat shield to give you a cleaner picture of where the mounting points are. With the bolts and heat shield removed, you can see that this gives us a clear shot to the mounting hardware that's securing the downpipe onto the cylinder head. There's 2 lower bolts and then 2 upper studs and nuts. Remove the 2 lower bolts completely and then just crack each of the upper nuts loose for now. That will complete the work we need to do in the engine bay with the car on the ground. For anyone that's doing this at home and wants to raise their vehicle and put it on jacks and jack stands, the way I usually do it is by lifting the car from the front, and then I'll set the jack stand on the lowest setting. Then I'll follow it up by raising the rear and putting it on the highest setting. I'll then go back to the front and then raise the vehicle and put it on the highest setting. That way the car is least likely to slip on the stands when mounting. Looking up at the oxygen sensor, slide the wire off the little bracket on the body and unclip the sensor from the main wiring harness. Using an O2 sensor socket, break it free and remove the sensor from the exhaust pipe. Where the downpipe meets up with the secondary cat, there are 2 bolts with springs that secure it together that need to be removed. Now because Hondas typically don't have flex pipes, they have to use these joints to allow for a little bit of movement. Using a 12mm socket and ratchet, crack them loose and then take them out. Adding an extension to your ratchet will allow you to remove the left bolt, which will in turn separate both of these exhaust pipes. There's a small bracket that helps support the weight of the factory primary cat. Using a 14mm socket, take her out. Before we can start removing more parts from the exhaust system, we'll find a small chassis brace that needs to be removed. There's going to be 2 12mm bolts that are going to be securing it up to the chassis. After the cats, we'll find these very rusted bolts, but we thankfully don't need to touch them. Towards the backside of the car by the resonator, we'll find the same kind of spring bolts that are connecting the axle back section. Now, depending on how rusty the bolts are, they may come out or they may snap. Now, it doesn't really matter since we're going to be replacing the entire thing, but just keep that in mind. Use a small pry bar and you can separate both sections of the exhaust. Now, moving down the exhaust all the way to the axle back, this is where we would find the muffler. However, the previous owner deleted it. Removing the exhaust hangers can be a little bit of a pain. However, if you spray them with some WD-40 or some other kind of lubricant, the challenge will become quite simple. Using exhaust hanger pliers too will also help with removing them. As for the midsection of the exhaust, you can see there's another rubber hanger found at the end of the resonator, and then another one basically in the middle of the car. Now back by the cats, we'll find the last hanger supporting the exhaust system. Once you slide it out, if you have someone to help you by pulling the exhaust out from underneath the car, it will make life a hell of a lot easier. Now, if you can pull you out too, that's even better. We birthed an exhaust.
Oh, dude.
I swear, if that shit wasn't recording. Okay, we're good. Woo! So this entire section of the exhaust, from the secondary catalytic converter all the way to the axle back section, can be taken out in one shot. Now, going back under the car to the primary catalytic converter, we'll find the lower heat shield. There's going to be 3 10mm bolts securing it, but the lower part of the heat shield for mine was rusted, meaning that I only really needed to take off the upper 2. With the bolts removed, remove the heat shield from behind the engine. Now, if you guys remember the 2 nuts on the top that I told you to leave on there earlier, well, those are the only things that are preventing the downpipe from falling down at this moment. Remove them by hand and then remove the catalytic converter. I thought I would have enough space to remove it by squeezing it in between the body and the subframe right here, but it unfortunately does not fit that way. Now, after shoving it back into the cavity behind the engine, I found a better route. After moving my oil filter magnet, I was able to remove it from right here. And as you can tell too, it didn't really need to be finessed. Now, I don't know why I didn't try this in the first place, but it is what it is. The last part of the exhaust to remove is the multi-layer steel gasket on the cylinder head. Now on the gasket, the flat side of the rivet faces the exhaust system, where the round side faces the engine. Just take note of that if you guys need to install a new one. Now next up, we need to remove the factory lower torque mount, located in between the front subframe and the oil pan. Now there's going to be 3 17mm bolts found in this area. Start by breaking them loose. Now I'll be using a breaker bar right here, since these are on the larger size for mounting bolts. With them all loose, continue unthreading them and set them aside. With the hardware out, you can see how easy it is to pivot the engine. Now you don't need to worry about the engine falling or anything, since the upper mounts are what serve that purpose. Wiggle the mount from side to side until you're able to remove it from the cavity in the subframe. So let's get started with getting the new parts ready. The Torque Solutions mounts are much stiffer than the factory rubber and will not allow for the exhaust system to move anywhere near as much as before. Now, given we have much larger piping, we have less clearance throughout the entire underside. Now, feel free to mount up each one of them on the exhaust now or afterwards when the exhaust is installed in the car. It's entirely up to you. Since the KTuned downpipe is a 2-piece design, they recommend using a high-temp gasket maker from Permatex to create the seal. It unfortunately does not come with the downpipe, so you will have to purchase some prior to being able to install it on your vehicle. Now, you should put a nice bead around the perimeter of the opening along with the bolts. The instructions say to tighten down the exhaust loosely and let it sit for an hour. Following that, they'll tell you to go back to it and torque each one of these bolts to spec. Now, before turning your car on, they say that you should let this sit for a full 24 hours to ensure that you don't have any leaks. Now, feel free to steer away from those recommendations at the expense of an exhaust leak. It's up to you. While we wait for the hour before tightening down the downpipe to the cylinder head flange, we can install the stiffer torque mount from Hasport. The first-gen versions of these mounts required you to replace this plate on the oil pan, and that is what caused a ton of negative reviews, as the vibrations were horrible for just using a slightly stiffer durometer bushing. Now, you have nothing to worry about with this new revised version that they came out in 2016. This looks just like the OEM design, so you have nothing to worry about. To install it, it's pretty straightforward. Using a silicone-based lubricant, spray the grippy polyurethane on both sides and also on the subframe. Then, while tilting the engine and transmission forward, twist the mount towards the passenger side until you can squeeze it into place. Using a small pry bar may help you to get it perfectly lined up. Thread the subframe bolt through the bushing, but do not tighten it yet. After you get the left and right mounting bolts threaded into place by hand, tighten those first and torque them to the factory spec. Then, go ahead and torque the subframe mounting bolt to spec. By doing it this way, it will ensure that the torque mount is not put under any stress in its resting position. The mount does its job when you put load on it. Everything should be snug in place and you'll notice almost no engine movement. Moving on, the muffler section of the exhaust can be installed. Unwrapping everything is great. It's like my birthday, but I'm the one spending money on my presents. So, not really a present, but still a good time. Anyways, when it comes to installing the axle back, the process is quite simple. Slide the inlet to the muffler over the rear control arm, and then just hook the exhaust hanger into place. The hardest part is going to be getting the stiff polyurethane to flex so that you can slide it onto the hanger. Using some silicone paste or lubricant will help, maybe even a little bit of muscle. Unfortunately, you can only buy one of these on Amazon. With the axle back section installed, we can move forward up the exhaust system. With every polyurethane bushing, don't be scared to lube it up. It really does help with sliding them on. When you get the bushings installed, you'll see you won't need anything to support the weight of the exhaust system. Using the supplied hardware, slide a new gasket in between both exhaust pipes, followed by a nut and bolt for each hole. Only hand tighten them at this point, as we need to align everything once all the pipes are installed. After an hour has elapsed, grab your torque wrench and tighten the 2 bolts by the flange for the downpipe. I secured them to 30 foot-pounds. Then, with the new MLS gasket on the cylinder head studs, slide the downpipe over top of it along with the Torque Solutions hanger. Using the factory hardware, reinstall the upper nuts on the studs to secure it in place, along with the bolts that are found on the bottom. Torque all the hardware up to the factory spec. To install the midsection, use the hardware and gaskets from the Yanaka kit. Begin by fully tightening the hardware starting at the downpipe flange. Then, tighten the hardware at the midsection, followed by the axle back. The last part of the exhaust system to install is the oxygen sensors. Now you can see I started to install the primary in the hole closest to the passenger side. However, it's too far away for the wiring harness. So if you are going to be using a KTuned downpipe or any other downpipe for that matter, swap the position of the plug and sensor and then you'll be set. Thread the secondary sensor into the downpipe and torque it to spec, just like we did with the first one. Ensure the wiring for it is routed in the same way as before to ensure you don't run into problems down the road. Now while you're under there, don't forget to reinstall the lower chassis brace and torque those bolts to spec. Now if you guys are installing a new exhaust on your car, you'll want to remove any kind of fingerprint you have on there. So I'm using a mix of alcohol and water on a microfiber towel, spray it on the towel, and just give everything a wipe down. If you leave any fingerprints or grease on the exhaust, when you get it hot, that will pretty much be staining the exhaust system and you won't be able to remove it easily. So taking the 2 seconds now to clean this up makes it look good for a long time. So the exhaust is installed and it's pretty much ready to go. I have a couple of the windshield wiper and the cowl area bits of the car to put back on. But after they're on, I'll start the car up and we'll see how this thing sounds. So here goes the first cold start after it's been retuned using the Honda Flash Pro. And now a couple of revs with the car at operating temp. At idle with the AC off, it's about 8 decibels louder, which is relatively more than before, however it's still quite quiet. On the highway, it's actually on average 1 decibel quieter, and I think that may be due to the fact that this setup now has a muffler. From the rear of the car by the muffler, it is also 1 decibel quieter, which also leads to basically the same conclusion with the vibrations for the car. The water in the bottle is vibrating a tiny bit more than before at idle, and just a little bit more at highway speeds. Now that leads me to the conclusion that the added noise that you hear from inside the car is correlated to the 72 durometer torque mount, where the exhaust is actually quieter than before. Now if you want to decrease the interior cabin noise and vibrations, you should get the same Hasport mount, however in a softer 62 durometer hardness. However, if you do like launching your car, I would suggest going with something a little bit stiffer like the 70. Watch this as I launch my car with the whole new setup. Forgot to turn off traction control. I didn't record a video prior to this showing the wheel hop, but it was reduced with this torque mount. Now I plan on changing over the lower control arm bushings too to help eliminate it entirely. I'll pretty much be doing something very similar to what I did with my Accord to reduce that wheel hop. But what I can say with the car is that it feels very good and super responsive. Even when it comes to shifting gears, since there is less play, rev matching, downshifting, and shifting in general is just much better. I'm very happy with this overall setup. Final notes, final thoughts about this. Well, the car sounds good. Car drives nice. I have other parts to install on the car. So realistically, if you guys were to do something like this, you'd want to follow this up with a proper tune. Now, I am not doing that yet because I have other intake parts for this car to go on first. So once I have all those parts on, that's when I'll get another flash, and that's where I'll be able to really take advantage of all these performance mods. If you guys want to see any of the parts or find purchase links to them, you'll be able to find all that stuff in the description box. If you guys have any further questions regarding the video, comment section's down there. You guys know what to do. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.